average American feels at least 10 years older than they actually are, and all blame the same day today annoyance. We'll talk about that. Kevin O'Leary explains why restaurants are shuttering across America and why more will follow. More retirees consider returning to work as high inflation squeezes. People are delaying buying new cars, creating a deflationary spiral. That's bad news for the auto industry. Now, Kevin O'Leary explains why restaurants are shuttering across America and why more will follow. He highlights the U.S. restaurant industry dire situation, noting the U.S. restaurant industry finds itself on a menu with frequent headlines about bankruptcies, layoffs, and closures impacting beloved brands like Red Lobster, Applebee's. Due to inflation and declining foot traffic post-pandemic, he adds seemingly every day there's a headline announcing a bankruptcy, layoff, or store closure impacting one of the country's most beloved brands. O'Leary explains that rising food prices and the shift to remote work has significantly hurt restaurants, especially in urban areas where expensive locations are no longer seeing enough foot traffic. He notes eateries in urban locations have been hit especially hard as their expensive locations are no longer receiving the footfall they need to meet rent. It's almost like the days where you used to go to a dealership to buy a car, and nowadays you don't necessarily need to go to a dealership because you do what? You can order a car and they'll come to you. I think Uber Eats has probably played a big role in hurting these guys as well, Tom. But what are your thoughts about the story here?
The restaurant industry is suffering, and he's right. I'll paint the picture a little bit more broad. He's talking about like the Applebee's location, downtown Dallas, and you don't have as many people in the high rises. It doesn't take much. If your EBITDA is like 15%, let's say you make 15% profit and you suffer like a 20% drop in people coming to the restaurant, you're probably pinched on the edge of that not being a profitable location, in trouble. So yes, remote work and the urban areas are causing some of it. But now put yourself in this position. How many problems can you manage at once and stay in business? One, sir, some of our key locations in downtown areas, they're pinched because the foot traffic is down. So we're really in trouble with those. We may have to think about closing some of them because now they're consuming cash, not generating it. Oh, no. But, sir, in general, our overall profitability is down because food prices. And by the way, TransUnion says that the food price inflation over the last 4 years actually is 30%. So that's TransUnion, one of the big credit agencies doing deep research. It's 30%. Okay, food prices are up. And, sir, by the way, in 4 states, we're going to have to pay $20 minimum wage. Oh, crap. How many problems can a restaurant manage at the same time as having locations that are not profitable because of foot traffic, getting pinched by $20 minimum wage, and then the food price? So Kevin Leary is right, and he's only hitting on one of the two things. And it's really unfortunate because a lot of people have favorite restaurants and things that they still patronize, but they're not survivable.
But I'm going to tell you something. That was a very good breakdown. Here's to look at. So Uber Eats revenue and usage statistics. This is from 2 months ago. Check this out. That's revenues from Uber Eats from 2018 to now. Look at Q1 2020. When did COVID happen? Second week of March. They felt it. But COVID launched Uber Eats business to the stratosphere. Look at the increase from 2018 to 2019. Not a big increase, 20%. But look at the increase from 2019 to 2020, nearly 3x. Then 2021, they double again. Then 2022, coming a couple of the restrictions are gone, 10.9, 12.1. But that business of going from 1.9, if you look at it, 1.9 to 12.1 billion, that's all money taken away from somebody. That's what Uber Eats made, revenue to them. This is the actual bookings. Look at that. 3.1 billion to 7.9 billion to 14.5 billion to 30.2 billion to 51.6, 55.7, 67.8 billion dollars. That's money going away from somebody. So COVID did this. It took money from restaurants, 200,000 restaurants shut down, and that money lost from restaurants directly in 50 million jobs were affected. That's not the right number. It was a number in the billions. But just visualize this. This is the business of restaurants. This is how much money restaurants had. What COVID shutdown did is it took this money from here, gave it to Uber Eats, drivers bringing food to them, and that money from here gave it to Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Moderna. Okay? Meaning this revenue of 100 billion or whatever the number is came at the cost of destroying the restaurant business. National Restaurant Association said restaurant and food service sales were $240 billion below 2020 pre-pandemic forecast. More than 110,000 eating and drinking establishments closed last year. How much money did Big Pharma make during COVID? Their Big Pharma raked in $90 billion in profits, Vinny. That's it, just the COVID-19 vaccines. That $90 billion of profits is like a 401k rollover. It rolled over from restaurants into Big Pharma. So you know what it makes me think about? Here's what it makes me think about. Every industry has lobbyists. This just tells you the lobbyists of Big Pharma are more powerful than the lobbyists of restaurant business. Why didn't the restaurant business lobby harder to protect them? What kind of access to resources do they have? What is the biggest restaurant chain that can go out there and be vocal about it? Why were they so quiet about it? They got destroyed. And if you think about restaurants, fast food chains would be considered low income, middle income, right? If you go to McDonald's, Burger King, places like that. Who is the biggest restaurant chain that's not fast food? What Applebee's does in revenue, $570 million. Today, that's their market cap. They only spend $200 million less than what their revenue is just in lobbying. You're not going to beat them. So guess what, folks? Here's what we learned. Big Pharma's lobbyists are more powerful than the restaurant industry's lobbyists, and that's how they got destroyed. The greatest 401k rollover, money rolled from 200,000 restaurant owners shutting down into the hands of Big Pharma. There you go. That's one way of looking at it. I'm just purely doing the math, and I'm looking at how this thing took place. But Uber Eats capitalized. Uber took a big share from a lot of these restaurants on the backs of a lot of bad policies.
I have some commentary here, but more from a macro perspective, not necessarily just the food industry, because I like how you kind of broke it down, whether it's Uber, whether it's these restaurants, whatever it is. But from a macro perspective, and then to kind of filter it down to a personal perspective, this is just Darwinism. This is just survival of the fittest. Can you adapt? What do I mean? What percentage of the companies that were in the Fortune 500 in 1950 or even in 1990 are still in the Fortune 500. We hear the stories that it's like the attrition rate is insane. 50% of the companies go out of the Fortune 500. I think 10% of the companies that were the biggest companies in the world in 1980 are still in the Fortune 500. How many companies have gone out of business? Whether it's WAMU, you tell that story. Whether it's Lehman Brothers, whether it's Bear Stearns, you tell the story about Kmart, JCPenney, Bed Bath & Beyond, Radio Shack, Blockbuster. These were the biggest companies in the world. WeWork, 2 years ago, what was it? Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. If you can't adapt and change with the times and you make poor decisions and you go on offense and you don't play defense, i.e. paying for lobbying, you could potentially go out of business. And I'll bring it to what PBD always says: outwork, out-improve, out-strategize, and then what's the last thing, PBD?
Outlast.
Outlast. If you don't do all those four things, you're not going to outlast the market.
Very good point.
I don't disagree with your concept, but I think in this case, it wasn't survival of the fittest. There was a meteor that hit Earth and killed all the dinosaurs, depending on which scientist you want to believe. A meteor hit the industry and killed these restaurants, and is what happened. COVID happened. They were forced to close, and all of a sudden they're only making food delivered by Uber Eats, and they don't get beverage, they don't get bar tab, they don't get all those other things, and all those other people that worked at the restaurant that were delivering the food. The only people that were working was the three chefs in the back making stuff that people were picking up with Uber Eats. So this was a meteor called COVID that hit the restaurant industry. But words talk, numbers scream. And Pat, we just broke down all the numbers of where all the numbers flowed after the meteor hit.
By the way, here's what I'll wrap up with this. I hope the folks in the restaurant business pay very close attention. When I was first coming up, and I'm like, I don't want to worry about politics because politics is a dirty business. That line, right? Politics is a dirty business. And guess what, folks? If you pay taxes is a form of politics. So you must pay attention to politics. And here's the other thing I learned as well. Those who don't study politics will be governed by fools who do. Yeah. To those of you in the restaurant business, watch the way you vote. One political party locked your ass down and you went out of business. Just remember that. You can sit there and tell me I'm a John F. Kennedy liberal, whatever you want to say. This is a very different climate today. We're shutting things down where other states left it open. Bob Iger was helping out Newsom in California with Disney. Newsom said, no, we're going to shut it down. Bob Iger got off the board and said, I'm not helping you out. He had two parks. One park was where? California. Shut down. Lost a bunch of jobs. The other place was Florida, ran by a guy named DeSantis that they ended up getting to the biggest fight. And Disney actually played games with DeSantis, calling it the Gable and all these weird things that you guys started doing. Guess what? Florida proved policies were better for restaurant, fast food, parks in California. Absolutely was. The next story. More retirees considering to work as high inflation squeezes. A Motley Fool survey shows 44% of retired Americans are considering returning to work due to chronic inflation and inadequate Social Security benefits, which despite a 3.2% cost of living adjustment in 2024, have not kept pace with rising costs. The average monthly Social Security payment of $19.07 in 2024 is significantly less than the $48.18 monthly expense reported by Americans ages 65 and older. Let me say this one more time. The average monthly Social Security payment in 2024 is $19.07. And that is a fraction of what Average American age 65 and older reported spending in 2022, which is $4,818. Okay. So with 27% relying on their sole income, inflation and high interest rates have drastically increased costs for necessities, causing severe financial pressure. Financial struggle has led 61% of respondents to report daily hardships, and many are considering retirement plans. About 25% of non-retired investors expect to return to work due to insufficient savings, while 19% doubt they will ever save enough to retire, with another 19% planning to retire later than expected due to inflation. Tom.
Words talk, numbers scream. We got a bunch of numbers here. It was very interesting. Side by side with this, Harris had a poll, and the Harris poll has been tracking. And boy, it's so surprising that mainstream media doesn't ever talk about this particular Harris tracking poll. In Q4, people said 79% of people said the number one issue, economic issue for them, was inflation. After saying 60% of them saying that economy was number one. Mm-hmm. And they said, what issue in the economy? 79% said inflation. In Q1, that was Q4 of last year. Q1, 82% it's inflation. In middle of Q2, May 10th, just passed by, 84% said it was inflation. And by the way, 75% of the people over 50 in a Harris poll said inflation is continuing to increase. Meanwhile, the federal government is saying inflation's under control. No, when people are saying inflation, it's affordability. And what's happening is these poor retirees, and the numbers we just saw, are saying, I can't do it. I got to go back. I want to be a Walmart greeter, or I got to do something because I've got a gap, and it's the affordability crisis. And I previously mentioned TransUnion's food inflation survey done at the end of Q1 said it was a 30% cumulative increase since the end of Q4 2020. There you have it. There's the numbers. The affordability crisis in America is worse than ever. And now the people who can least afford it are thinking about, man, I got to go back to work. I got to get a side hustle. Grandma has to get a side hustle. Where are we?
I love Tom's commentary here. I'll flip it. Tom always says the following, there's the upstream problems and the downstream problems, right? This would probably be the upstream problem is a 70-year-old who has to go back to work. Sucks. Nobody wants to do that. But the reason that they're doing that is the downstream problem is they just never paid attention to saving enough money and investing. And that's the biggest problem. So what's the message that you guys can take if you're 30, 40 years old, whatever? It's nobody cares about your problems 30 years from now. When it's time for you to retire, 30 years from now, when you go to retire and you're like, well, inflation in 2024, no one's going to care in 2054. They're going to say, what did you do over the last 40, 50 years of your life to get out of debt, stop being paycheck to paycheck, start saving and investing? Because I know one thing for sure. You cannot save your way to becoming a millionaire. You have to figure out a way to become an investor. And you're going to need $1 million, $2 million when you retire at 70 years old, whatever it is, so you don't end up on the government plan. So you guys at home right now, flip a coin, heads and tails. Heads, you're going to have money in retirement. Tails, you're not going to have money in retirement. Because the reality is this, 50% of you are straight up going to be on the government plan. And the other 50% are like, oh, shit. I don't want to have to rely on Social Security, and I don't have a pension, and I haven't saved enough money. I should probably start that 401k thing that they talk about, that Roth IRA thing. I should probably stop living for today and plan for tomorrow, because if you're 30, you're going to be 40. If you're 40, you're going to be 60. And the reality is, if you don't save that money, you're going to end up one of these old people that in 30 years has to go work.
So a couple things. One, we can talk what you should have done, which we have to do that because we have to learn from our parents' mistakes and what they did right, what they didn't do right. This Sunday at church, this pastor gave a message which I thought was absolutely powerful. It was unbelievable. However, one of the messages that you said that I agree with is the fact that this is what happens when you don't pay attention to money, period. You're going to go through this. And you're paying a price for it today that you weren't taking finances seriously. You were being sloppy, not working on another job. You were coming home, making sure you didn't miss a single Miami Heat game or didn't miss a single Laker game because you're a true Laker fan or a Dodger fan or I'm a Chicago White Sox. So I'm going to come home and I want to watch every single game. Yeah, Chicago White Sox or the Lakers or the Miami Heat, these guys barely pay retirement plan to their athletes they used to play for them, let alone you. They're not going to be paying your bills. Okay, it's kind of like goes back to that one movie Bronx Tale where, the guy's got a Mickey Mantle card says, does Mickey Mantle pay your bill?
Mickey Mantle pay your rent?
Number two is the following. And by the way, that reminds me of a concert I went to with Siamak years ago. When I had lost my voice, I couldn't speak for 6 months. I did a surgery. Siamak took me to a concert in Newport Beach or somewhere like that, Irvine. And it was by a man named, I believe it was Dariush. And Daryush was one of the best singers. I can listen to his music all freaking day long. I love Daryush. One of the things Daryush said, by the way, just so you know, he had some issues back in the days, drug stuff like that. He opened up. He is beloved. People love this guy, right? And he gets up and he says, I want to apologize to all of you. He wanted to give two advice to everybody. I want to apologize to all of you. He says, I want to apologize for not being invited to your weddings. They're like, what are you talking about? He says, because I never sang songs happy enough to be invited to your weddings. Why would you invite somebody like me to your weddings? But you know what he said right afterwards?
What?
He said, I want to say something to the young people in the room here, to those in their 20s, the young wolves, the 30s. He says, make sure the young wolf in you takes care of the old wolf one day you'll be.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
Because the old wolf will not have the same fire that you have today.
Yep.
But very soon you're going to be my age. Let me tell you, it leveled me to come back and give that message to other people. So now we all have parents that maybe financially they didn't make the right decision or something. We can't now go to them and say, how come you don't work for it? We're not in that business. You just want them to live a happier life and realize a part of that responsibility now lies on you. Because the government can't do it all by themselves. You have to do it partially. Government's going to do it partially. The reason why government gets 1907 and not the whole 4881 is because it's not the government's job. I'm not supposed to take care of your parents. I'm going to do my part with my parents, right? But taxpayers are willing to pay 1907 portion to Social Security. And the last thing I'll say, which is kind of weird, is the following way. A part of me likes people working in their 70s. And you can call me out and be upset and say whatever you want. My dad has had 13 heart attacks, 3 stents in his heart, bypass surgery, God knows how many angiograms, angioplastics, you name it. He takes 50 pills a day. I'm being sarcastic, but it's a lot of pills he takes every day. He's 82 years old. You know why he's 82 years old? Because he just retired 2 years ago. And he finally moved into my house. Till 2 years ago, he was working. Not because he needed to. He could have retired a long time ago. He kept working because he wanted to stay active. Yep. So part of me, if you're listening to this, and let's just say you're 72 years old or 68 years old, and you're like, I don't need the money, dude, go find a job 2 days a week doing something. Find a way to contribute. There's a part of it that for me is not feeling like it's actually bad for you. You're meeting other younger people. There's something that happens. I'm around Brooklyn. Brooklyn makes me younger, okay? And I'm 45. I'm not old. But even Brooklyn makes me younger, and she's only 2 or 3 years old, right? Now imagine if we're 75. And, you know, and we're only hanging around 75-year-olds. Dude, you got to go around 30-year-olds and 20-year-olds and 40-year-olds and let them kind of fire you up a little bit. But anyways. Yeah.
Number one, I love your dad. And the fact that he's still putting things together, knitting, he's staying active. He's chasing Brooklyn around. Love him. But you're absolutely right. Like my mom is 74 years old. She's about to be 74. I said, Mom, when are you going to retire? She's like, why would I retire? Yeah. I love working. She works as a nurse. She loves interacting with people. She said, what am I going to do all day? I don't golf. I don't do any of this. So there's nothing wrong with working when you actually enjoy what you do. The flip side of that, I remember, you know me and my Ubers. One time I get in an Uber, and it was the oldest Uber driver I've ever been in his car. This guy must have been 80 years old. Usually Uber drivers will be very subtly like, hey, thank you for a tip. This guy, as the ride started, hey, don't forget to tip the driver. He had a sign. Yeah. Remember to tip the driver. He's like, hey, remember at the end of tip your driver. I go, okay, why? You know, like, you haven't even driven me yet. And he goes, this is essentially what you said with the young wolf and old wolf. He goes, let me tell you a little something. And he was talking. He goes, I used to be the biggest fashion designer. I used to go to Italy and travel. And I'm from New York. And I got to tell you honestly, I didn't save any of my money. So now I have to drive Uber. He's not blaming it. He's saying basically, I lived for today, not for tomorrow. He's 80 years old, sharp, like in a suit.
Yeah. And
he goes, yeah, I don't want to be driving Uber. So I gave him a $20 tip on a $20 ride. But I felt this guy's